amazes me what we can do anymore. We have such good pictures of everything.
Oh, yeah.
I'll call this meeting of the Board of Zoning Appeals to order. The first item on the agenda is we request the staff confirmation that Kansas Open Meetings Act required notice has been properly provided.
The packet was posted and the required notice of the meeting was provided.
Very good, thank you. And now we'll have the roll call.
I'll proceed to call roll. Board Member May. Board Member Creer.
Yeah, here.
Board Member Waters.
Here.
Board Member Trout.
Tro, here.
Board Member Owens.
Here.
Board Member Acting Chair Hardy.
Here.
Chair Dorsweiler.
Thank you.
We do have a quorum to proceed with today's meeting, and having met our notice requirements, we may now proceed with today's business. I would like, he's introduced himself, but to introduce everybody, Mr. Ken Creer, who is the newest appointed Board of Zoning Appeals member, and this is his first meeting since being appointed, so we want to welcome him.
Congratulations.
I hope so.
So we can go to our approval of minutes.
All right, we need to approve our meetings, minutes from the meeting of March 16th, 2023 regular meeting. Do I hear a motion?
I move that we approve the minutes of the March 16, 2023 meeting.
And we have a second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Motion passes. Our new business.
For new business, we have two public hearing items for you this afternoon that we have advertised for a hearing today, July the 20th. The first application is a variance application B23-3. That's been filed by Mr. Dan Audie requesting a front yard setback variance of 14 feet from 25 feet, the minimum setback required on a corner lot in an R1 residential district, to 10.8 feet to allow the construction of a 7-foot by 37-foot covered front porch addition on the non-address side of a corner lot that's located at the southwest corner of Beloit Avenue and Highland Avenue. It's identified on the aerial photo there, and the street address of the property is 1102 Highland Avenue, and Mr. Aiken is going to be presenting you the report today.
Thank you for that introduction, Dean. Good afternoon, Mr. Vice Chair, Commissioners. So as Dean said, we are looking at a variance application here on the corner of Beloit Avenue and Highland Avenue. The applicant is proposing to construct this front yard porch in the Beloit Avenue front yard setback area to create a wraparound porch with the existing covered porch along Highland Avenue and the existing uncovered deck at the west end of the house. So this property is approximately 60 feet wide by 99.75 feet deep, so it's just under 6,000 square feet. And building records show that the existing dwelling on the property was built around 1940, but we don't know for sure. So the property is located on a corner lot, as we mentioned. So there's 2 front yards and 2 side yards, and the primary front yard here abuts Highland Avenue. Staff would note that the setback on Beloit Avenue is a pre-existing non-conforming setback at about 18 feet. What that means is our current zoning requirements require at least a 25-foot front yard setback, but because this dwelling was built sometime between probably the 1920s and 1940s, where codes were different, that's why it has that non-conforming setback. So as justification for the requested setback variance, the applicant states that if the 7 by 37 covered porch addition were constructed as proposed, the majority of homes in the grounds of Kansas Westland University subdivision with a primary front yard along West Beloit Avenue would be set back in line or still closer to West Beloit Avenue than if this porch was constructed in its proposed location. So in terms of setbacks and adhering to the zoning ordinance, covered porches are treated like dwelling additions, and so they need to adhere to the standards of a dwelling as well as the underlying zoning district. So in the R1 zoning district where this property is located, the front yard minimum required setback is 25 feet. For side yards, it's 7.5 feet, and for rear yards, it's 25 feet as well. In terms of staff's analysis on this project, the applicant states that his property is unique because his house has a small living space in comparison to other properties located along West Beloit Avenue and properties within this subdivision. And this is shown by one of the applicant's attachments, A7, which we have in the graphics folder. So the applicant further states his property is unique because his secondary front yard along West Beloit Avenue is greater than many of the primary front yards east and west of this property between Santa Fe Avenue and 9th Street. Also, the applicant claims his property is unique because when recently replacing the siding along the north side of the house where the proposed porch would be, he discovered an existing doorway that had previously been closed off, which is shown by attachments A9 and A10. So staff looked at a Sanborn map that we have on file from 1931, and it shows that the existing porch and deck at the east and west ends of the house, which are currently there, were present on that Sanborn map. However, we did not find a porch along Beloit Avenue, so we can't conclusively say that that door means that there was in fact a porch there at some time. Planning staff measured the front yard setbacks of properties along the south side of West Beloit Avenue from Santa Fe Ave to 9th Street. And from those samples that staff measured, we found that the average setback in that area is 16.7 feet. So this property has a greater than average setback in that area along Beloit Avenue. The applicant also asserts that his property has the 7th smallest main living space in this grounds of Kansas University subdivision, which necessitates the need for a variance. So staff does not believe that having a small living space justifies approval of a front yard porch variance. However, staff would agree that this property does have some unique characteristics. To begin, like I said earlier, the property has 2 front yards. So this limits developable area if this wasn't on a corner versus if this was not on a corner lot and they had 2 side yards instead, because that setback would be 7.5 feet, not 25. That pre-existing non-conforming setback, as we noted earlier, is another unique situation here. And then in addition to having 2 front yards and a pre-existing non-conforming setback, the property is unique due to its small lot size at 6,000 square feet. That is the minimum allowable lot size in the current zoning code for R1 districts, and most R1 properties in the city are 8,000 square foot lots, usually at minimum. They're usually larger than that. So in this case, the board must decide whether the property at 1102 Highland Avenue is in fact unique in comparison to properties within the adjacent area and within the city, and whether any of these unique characteristics justify the approval of a front yard setback variance for the construction of a covered porch. In terms of no adverse effects on neighbors, the applicant believes this proposed covered porch construction would not cause any adverse effects on neighbors. The applicant presented the site plan and building plans to neighbors as shown by attachment A11, and he received 14 out of 16 signatures of approval. The applicant also states that he believes the construction would allow for better interactions with neighbors, as well as it would increase the aesthetics of the neighborhood, as well as property values. So staff agrees that most impacts associated with this project would be localized on the applicant's lot. However, staff would note that the construction of the proposed covered porch would create a visual encroachment in what is supposed to be an open front yard area. The board must consider here the following question. Is there another location that would meet the needs of the applicant while still being located behind the front yard setback line? In terms of unnecessary hardship, the applicant states they have a small foundation in relation to the other homes in this subdivision, and that this small interior space makes it difficult to comfortably have friends and family over. Staff agrees that a 729 square foot footprint is smaller than average. However, staff would request that the applicant provide additional explanation as to why not being allowed to construct a 7 by 37 covered porch in a front yard setback constitutes an unnecessary hardship upon the applicant. In terms of health, safety, and welfare, the applicant claims the construction of the covered porch wouldn't have any effects on that. Staff would agree that the proposed covered porch would be aesthetically compatible with the applicant's existing covered porch. And staff would also note that the covered porch would not be located in a vision clearance triangle due to the right-of-way distance from the front property line to West Beloit Avenue. However, the public welfare includes more than just physical appearance of the structures and traffic safety. One of those considerations is an open front yard unobstructed by any structures or objects. Lastly, in terms of adherence to the zoning ordinance, the purpose of having an open front yard setback is to preserve adequate open space adjacent to public roadways. And a variance to allow an additional building encroachment into a front yard setback should only be considered when the physical characteristics of the lot make that the only feasible option for expansion or new construction. So in this case, the board must decide whether there are other available locations where a covered porch could be constructed that meets existing setback requirements, and whether constructing a covered porch in the proposed location and encroaching into a front yard setback would undermine the spirit and intent of the city's front yard setback regulations. Staff has provided some potential findings for approval and denial of this case to help reach a decision. But in terms of the alternatives the board has here, staff has identified the following options. One, the board could approve the requested front yard setback variance with or without conditions if the findings of fact can be made. The board could approve a lesser variance than requested, for example, a 15-foot front yard setback variance if the required findings can be made, and this would allow for the construction of a narrow covered porch. The board could postpone consideration of this application if additional information is needed, or the board could deny the variance request if the findings of fact can be made. So I'll conclude my presentation there, and staff and the applicant are by for any questions you may have.
Thank you. Since the chair is now here, I will defer to the chair for the rest of the meeting.
Okay.
Thank you. Are there any questions for staff?
It appeared that the setbacks were maybe never established in that street.
Maybe many of the homes along Beloit Avenue are in line. Maybe we can pull up some of those photos. But there are some pretty drastic differences. Like you'll see 10 feet, 10 feet, 29 feet.
Right.
So
But there's no indication or record that shows that there was a uniform setback.
No, we do not have record of that.
I assume this wasn't originally, and the original plat didn't have setbacks establishing.
No. So
There was no setbacks on the original plat
No.
at all?
So,
What is the standard setback now for in residential from the road to the building for a house in residential?
from the,
Right,
Can it
because
be
I'm
the front
assuming we have our
property line?
setbacks so people can
So
see to
There
adequately turn.
isn't typically a quote-unquote standard. It's measured, all of our setbacks are measured from the property line in most of our zoning districts. The exception to that is usually arterials, where we also consider the center line. But for most residential districts, you're looking at 25 feet from the property line or 55 feet from the center line in a residential area. And most of our right-of-ways for new plats, new subdivisions, and residential developments are going to be about a 60-foot right-of-way.
Yeah.
And so what that means is, although there is no typical setback from the curb, a rule of thumb is maybe 13 feet, give or take. Kind of depends on how the street sets in that right-of-way. In this particular case, because it is an older subdivision and a lot of our older subdivisions have sidewalks along with our newer subdivisions, the sidewalk is usually also another good reference point to show about where that property line is. So if we look at this photo that we have on our screen, you can see the sidewalk here and you see the fence kind of right behind it. So the fence is probably pretty close to where that property line is.
you can't clearly tell from this photo, from back here anyway, but many of those lines further west along Beloit, many of the houses line up in a pretty consistent line. And then along Highland, going north and south along Highland, many of those homes also line up in a pretty consistent line. So if that adds any helpful information for you.
Go ahead.
Spencer, the fence that's shown in the photos,
Yeah.
Would that have gone through some city board to get that approved?
No.
No, that's,
And, yeah.
property owner can just put that up.
Yeah. Based on that height, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So the fence limitations are going to be based on the type of fence it is. In other words, is it an open fence, is it
Yeah.
a solid fence? If it's a 50-50 fence, just is approximately 50-50, where you have pickets, but then you have spaces in between the pickets, you can go up to 4 feet in a front yard setback area. If it's a solid fence, then it would have to maintain a 3-foot height maximum. So because this one is open and it's decorative, it's probably a little over 3 feet maybe, or maybe it is 3 feet. It's hard to tell from the photograph.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any additional questions for staff? If not, would the applicant like to speak?
Board, I'm Dan Audie, and this is Kerry Bogart. We own the house at 1102 Highland. You know, the staff did a really adequate job of explaining the situation. There's just a couple of things that I would bring up that quite possibly might be a little bit new information, I guess, for lack of a better term. When I look through the submission packet that was presented to you that had the staff's findings, a couple things stuck out at me. The setback for 119 Beloit and 121 Beloit, 29 and 28 foot respectively. Those, you know, just didn't seem right compared to what the photos were showing me. And so I took it upon myself to go ahead and measure the setbacks from the inside of the sidewalk. You know, just like the staff said, that's a pretty good representation. In actuality, when we had our lot surveyed, it was about 10 inches inside the sidewalk was where our property boundary was, okay? And so since the sidewalk's straight, you know, the streets are straight, we're gonna assume that, you know, could possibly be a good reference point for property boundaries up and down Beloit. So with that said, I took it upon myself to go ahead and measure the properties, and I also included the rest of the properties because the staff had not included some of the properties along the street that have an adjacent wall to the street. Matter of fact, 1017 South 9th has an adjacent wall, 22 West Beloit has an adjacent wall, 1016 Highland has an adjacent wall, 1101 Highland has an adjacent wall, and 1000 South Santa Fe. These all have adjacent walls to either the 100 or the 200 block of West Beloit. Okay, and so those were not included in the demographics or the statistics that you guys were given on the setbacks. So with that in mind, I found a couple of errors, and I have one for staff here also. And pardon me, I didn't know how many people were going to be here, but these are actual measurements from the measurements that I took today. And you can see that there are a few discrepancies in there that, that maybe the staff would like to address on these. These measurements that you guys took, did you guys take these actual measurements, or did you take them off of the Sanborn?
Yeah, this is from a 1931 Sanborn map. Yep.
Your measurements came from the Sanborn maps, that's correct?
Yeah, and that's
Okay.
stated in the report.
So these are the actual measurements that I took today. And you can see that when we do the averaging with the additional properties in there, that the average changes substantially. We go from 1644, the staff says 16.7, and I assume that's probably just in the inches that they had in their factors, and I just pulled round numbers, down to 1271 as the average for the block. What we're asking for is, I think we're asking for, right around 11, something in that range, So, that's not substantially outside of what the average is in this particular neighborhood. Also, I would like to also mention that even though we did have a couple of numbers that were kind of off the 21, it's still 121 West Beloit, and 1103 South 9th, and then 215 West Beloit. Those three properties in themselves, add substantially to the average, just in the fact that those three properties are set back substantially further. One thing that I would mention is that we, and I'm not really sure how the Sanborn map thing works, as far as that goes, because the map was in a map from 1931. Is that what I understand?
Yes.
Okay.
Updated
all right.
in 1962.
And so you saw that it did not have a side porch on the 31 map?
Yes.
Okay. The house was constructed in 40, and so I'm not really understanding.
That was from county appraiser data.
The
so-
county appraiser data is wrong on the construction date of the house. Is that normal?
No, what I'm trying to convey is if the house was built on 1940, the original Sanborn maps for the area were done in 1931. They were then updated in 1962 to reflect construction that had occurred between 1931 and 1962.
Okay.
So your house that was constructed between 1931 and 1962
Okay.
shows up, as does the others, on the 1962 updated Sanborn map.
So it did not show it on the 31 map then?
We don't have a copy of the 31 map.
Okay,
We have
okay.
a copy of the 31 map updated in 1962.
Okay, so the amended copy in 62, so, I guess what we're looking at really is that anything that happened prior to 1962 regarding any type of a porch on the side of the house is unknown, and my submission to you is that people typically don't cut holes in houses without being able to exit them. And I think that there's probably some type of a situation in there that the house possibly did have some type of a structure on that side of the house. We find that when we were doing the siding to the home, when we didn't have any idea that was there. That's kind of what prompted this whole process. When my contractor found the opening and stuff, we kind of stopped and let's take a step back and see what's going on here, and that's when we kind of decided that it would possibly be something that would be,
Map, I don't think so.
it would be a possibility to have this wraparound porch. The only other thing that I would address that the staff was talking about is at one point in time, one of the mentions was that there was, how was it phrased? Something to the effect of a front yard clutter. Is that what it was said? I'm not sure. As far as when it was saying it was going to be potentially inhibiting the.
Well, that is one of the considerations of why we have setback requirements, yes.
Front yard clutter.
Front yard, yes.
You know, I would submit to staff that and to the board. You know, you guys saw the conceptual drawings of it. You know, you guys can see the aerial photos and such like that. You know, some of you have had extensive background in homes. You know, and being able to. Especially, you know, Mr. Creer, I think you got a career in selling homes, is that correct?
Correct.
You know, I don't see any real ill effect in putting a wraparound porch on this, considering the neighborhood or to the value of the adjacent properties, you know, as far as clutter would go. You know, I'm not really sure exactly what would be meant by that. As a matter of fact, I think it's more of a, like I explained in the packet, it's more of a unifying thing. When we put this porch on, it's going to bring a little bit of structure to this part of the block. You know, bringing those houses in line and one last thing I would mention. You know, we do have these setbacks. To my understanding, and I could be corrected by staff, the original setback reason, one of the primary reasons, I guess, was to not inhibit sight lines. Is that correct, for traffic, through traffic?
That's very important, yes.
Okay. One of the things that was a consideration before I even approached the city and figured all this out, you know, is this thing going to cause some type of an issue with traffic, you know, or is somebody going to be able to not see around or be able to somehow or another be affected by this? And I would submit to you that we have a stop sign on Beloit. Beloit is not through traffic, so I want that to be considered or part of your consideration. Highland does not have to yield to Beloit traffic in any way, shape, or form. And so what we're looking at is the Highland traffic being through traffic. That would be where we would be building. We would be building into the sight line of Highland, okay? Not the sight line of Beloit, okay? So that's something that's an important consideration because of that stop sign. So I would, you know, be willing to answer any questions that the board might have. I think I've kind of almost started a new career on trying to figure out, you know, how to navigate the porch situation. We're just hopeful that you guys would see your way fit to be able to afford us this variance.
Are there any questions for the applicant?
Yes. Do you have an idea of the distance between the house on the south side to the privacy fence of the neighbor?
The privacy fence, yeah, we've got that measurement, and the privacy fence is actually not shown, but the privacy fence is essentially about a foot inside of the sidewalk, and the sidewalk measurement is shown on, let's see, it's shown on drawing A4, and you can see that we're looking at a proposed 13 feet from the deck to the sidewalk. So we'd be looking at a 12-foot yard.
I was asking about the south side of the
The
house.
south side of the house. The south side of the house is the opposite side.
Yeah.
The opposite side of the house.
Right.
Okay.
I was curious because, you know, your house has
Yeah,
two
the opposite
sides.
side of the house is 15 feet, and it's also on A4.
Okay.
Yeah,
But
15 feet.
Okay, I was just curious about that because I wasn't on your property, but it would be pretty easy to see that construction on that side of the
yeah.
house
And-
would not be as
Yeah.
desirable.
Yeah, I see where you're going with that. The drawback to that particular, and honestly, we thought about that. The drawback to that particular circumstance is that's where the utilities are brought into the house. We've got our electrical over there. We've got our AC over there. We've got low-lying windows in that particular part of the lawn, and so it would create a little bit more of a challenge. This particular, as you can see by the photos, this particular part of the structure doesn't have any windows in this area that would be encumbered by either the roof line or the decking area and stuff. It does have a couple of small windows, but on that other side of the house, and I apologize for not taking pictures of that, but that other side of the house is pretty busy, I guess is what I would call it.
Are there any other questions from the board?
Yeah, you said you found a shut-up door on that,
Yeah.
on the north side where you're going to put your,
That's correct.
But
I've got photos of that on.
They have.
Oh, it did? Okay. Well, you've got that in your packet
Right.
also, and
right. I was just wondering, were you going to reopen that door?
No, sir.
No?
No, we have no plans in opening that door. We have no plans, and this is an important factor also, we have no plans for stairs off of that part of the porch also. And I've taken and looked into the codes, and we're okay to not have stairs in that particular section of the property. The railing will be a lowered height, I guess, is what it amounts to, because I believe that it's 36 or 32 foot off the ground? You have to have the railing requirements. Is that
Anything
30
that's above 30,
inches? I mean,
anything that's above 30 inches above the ground
anything
has to
above
have a
30.
railing.
yeah. And this particular deck, is going to ring in there somewhere around 2 foot. Something like that. It's a pretty low lying deck as far as that goes. And we'll be utilizing the existing front porch steps and the existing back porch steps for egress of this particular section of the house. We're really just wanting something that is a nice little sitting area. So,
Are there any additional questions for the applicant? Are there any questions or comments from the public?
We do not have anyone on Zoom, so any comments would be in the room.
You're fine.
Is there anybody in the room that would like to speak? I do have one quick question for staff.
Okay.
The city of Salina has been around for a long time, and there are certain structures probably within the city that don't conform with current zoning requirements. The first building that comes to my mind is the building located on the southwest corner of 9th and Crawford. It's very hard to see when you turn from that building. If that building was demolished, whether by man or some tornado or some event, and it was to be rebuilt, would it have to conform with the current zoning regulations?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Is there any comments from the board?
I guess from my point of view, I kind of see it as, this plat was established without setbacks. And even the neighboring houses next to it, they encroach into that 25-foot setback. It's kind of been established. I don't know if it's fair to be able to apply setbacks that current standards to an older neighborhood that was established well before these kind of standards came along. And, probably today, if you were to plat that type of a lot, nowadays, you would provide room for that setback, and I guarantee it wouldn't. I don't know what's the minimum width of a R1 lot. I'm sure it's a lot more than 6. Well,
What's the minimum? 60,
so
yeah.
that is kind
It's
of the
still
minimum.
60, but by practice, almost all new subdivisions, the typical lots are 80 to 85 feet wide, and that's mostly a function of nobody wants to build houses with one-car garages anymore. So you need the extra width to have the extra width for the garage, not necessarily for the house. But most of our new subdivisions, it's 80 to 85 feet, and that's not required by code. It's required because that's the current construction practice.
And most likely, even with the minimum 60, with it being a corner lot, you would probably make it a little bit wider to account for the extra setbacks. I guess I look at it from a standpoint is it's been established, that line, that they're not protruding into that beyond what other houses have. And with it being on a corner lot, there's a little bit of a safety factor in sight triangles, but with it having a stop condition, that really kind of rules out any issues as far as sight triangles go.
I did want to point out that when we talk about sight lines and vision, that one of the primary reasons for setbacks and one of the primary reasons why we don't allow fences in the front yard that are solid is because you have driveways and you don't want to have a storage shed, you don't want to have a 6-foot tall solid fence running next to a driveway, because when somebody's trying to back out of that driveway, they need to have visibility. So when we talk about vision clearance, we're not just talking about street intersections, we're also talking about people backing out of driveways. Because one of the most frequent calls we get is a movable obstacle, and that is my neighbor has parked their 30-foot RV in their driveway next to my driveway, and when I back out, I can't see. And so that is considered a temporary or movable site obstruction, but we wouldn't want, that's why we don't allow solid 6-foot fences in the front yard, because that obstructs people's visibility when they're coming out of their driveways.
So we did have the engineering department help us do a clear sight triangle analysis to see if this proposed deck would encroach upon it, and it does not. So that's not a issue here.
But the site triangle of concern is the driveway.
Yeah. And I went by the property twice. First time it looked like it might be okay, but the second time was after I knew about the setbacks of the houses on Beloit, and seeing that with the additional structure, I did not see where it would stick out like a sore thumb compared to the other structures on Beloit, and so I felt like at that point that it was not an unreasonable request to take some of that setback and use for that purpose.
Any other comments from the board? My only comment that I would like to make is, after reading the presentation, listening to the presentation, I'm not quite sure what the hardship would be if we did not grant the variance.
My second trip there was for that purpose, and so when I think the hardship relates to the enjoyment of that structure, because if they put it on the south side of the house, there's a 6-foot privacy fence just on the other side of the deck then. That would not
A 1 or 2 foot wide.
have any, so the deck would not have the same inherent pleasurable aspect as it would if it's on the north side and you have an open view of the street and people walking up and down and that sort of thing. I viewed it as something of like a porch, perhaps front porch but on the other side of the house, where if you're sitting out there and people walk by and say, "Hi, how you doing?" But that would not happen if the deck was on the south side of the house. There would be no way.
I was, excuse me, I was also there when Mr. Hardy was there and we conversed about it. I think the aesthetic value will help that house a lot. I know that house very well, and I think adding to that will help add the value and just make it a lot more pleasurable for them to be able to use it. Because it does line up, we talked about that there, so I have no negative aspects towards it.
Is there a, go ahead.
I have to just say, I love wraparound porches, so I'm there with you anyway, so. But no, I agree with what's been said here. I don't see how this is going to adversely affect the neighborhood much at all. My only comment, and they have no control over this, city has no control over it. The way some of the people drive in this town, stop signs don't mean that much, but anyway, like I said, you can't control that, city can't control that. That's
It's
just
a pretty
the way,
good neighborhood, though.
that's just the way some people are, so.
Is there a motion to come before the board?
I move that we approve application number V23-3, including the conditions that were proposed by staff.
I second that.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carried.
Thank you.
Oh,
The
Mr. Audi and the board, we can now issue your
I used to
building
walk.
permit, so we'll look to turn that around as quickly as we can.
All right, thank you.
Alrighty.
by that house a lot. And one time I was going back.
Next on the agenda is application AP 21-3.
This is also a public hearing item, but it's not a variance, it's an appeal. And Mr. Hers will explain that in a little more detail as why it's coming to you as an appeal. But this is an application for a home-based business that the zoning administrator cannot approve administratively. And this, to operate a business in a detached garage, requires notice to neighbors and action by the Board of Zoning Appeals. So this is a request to allow a sign design and vinyl printing business to operate out of a detached garage. And the location is 921 South 3rd Street, and Mr. Hers will have the report for you.
Andrew, Board of Zoning Appeals. So there are two types of applications primarily that the Board of Zoning Appeals deals with. The first is the most common, and that's the variance application, which you have dealt with previously in this meeting. The second type of application that you might see is an appeal. And an appeal is designed for anyone in the community who disagrees with the interpretation of the code of the zoning administrator to appeal that decision, and we bring it to you as a board, and you would determine whether or not the appeal is valid or if it is invalid. There are also some prescribed appeals that our code has, and one of those prescribed appeals happens to be an appeal for a home occupation in a detached structure. So the City of Salina has a home occupation section within it, which allows for very limited and prescribed home businesses to be operated in a residential structure out of the resident's home. The resident has to live there, and there are limitations and restrictions that they are bound to in order to not disrupt the residential character of the neighborhood. So examples of those might be a tutoring business, a home office for like a realtor or something along those lines, artists, sculptures, musicians. Those are some of the types of home occupations that you might find. The most common that we have are beauty shops and salons, and those are limited to like a one-chair setting, and there's no employees that are allowed when you have a home occupation. It's a one-man band kind of situation where the person who's operating that business is the resident there, and they don't have help from the outside. So the applicant came to us in March with an application for a home occupation in order to have a sign design and vinyl printing business in their detached garage. So the applicant has a 1,000 square foot detached garage that's on the north side of their building that was constructed in 1981, prior to some of the limitations that we have on garage sizes today, and they are wanting to operate a vinyl printing and design business. So previously they had been owners and operators of Gleason Son Signs, where they did a lot of sign work, and so they still have a number of clients who have some minor vinyl work that they do, design work that they do, that even though they're retired from the sign business, they still do some design work and vinyl work for some of their former clients. And so the applicant has stated that they believe that their proposed home occupation is similar to an artist or a sculptor's type of studio or photographer studio, even though the code itself does not have sign design and vinyl printing as a prescribed permitted use. They do feel they are similar to, like I said, artists, sculptures, or photographer studios that a home might have. One of the limitations that the home occupation section does have, in addition to not allowing staff to approve home occupations that are not inside the residential dwelling, is we are also not allowed to permit home occupations that have abnormal equipment. So a home occupation is supposed to use and be operated through equipment that is typically found in a residential setting. And what the applicant argues is that, well, that's true, but artists, sculptors, photographers, they're going to have special equipment that may not be common in most residential areas. However, they would still be appropriate for a residential property. And so that's what they feel their equipment is. And I'll show you some examples of what they have. So inside their detached garage, what they're proposing is a 5-foot by 11-foot table in which the vinyl prints can be worked on, can be riveted, can be sewed, whatever they need to do as part of their production to make the vinyl sheets whole and complete. So they do have a large table, and they also have a couple of printers. And so these are vinyl printers, and they're similar to a plotter or a large printer. They argue that it's similar to a printer that you might have at your house, except it's on a larger scale. They don't make a lot of noise. They don't have any hazardous materials or explosive substances that are involved with them. And so they believe that even though the equipment they're proposing to use is not typically found in a residential home, it would be similar to what a lot of residential houses might have and wouldn't impact the neighbors. And so one of the reasons that the home occupation regulations do not allow businesses to operate in detached garages unless there is approval by this board is because usually accessory structures or detached garages are closer to adjacent property lines because they have shorter setbacks. A lot of times your setback is only 3 feet versus at least 7.5 feet, which you might have with your dwelling. And a lot of times you don't have the same insulation and soundproofing capacity in a detached garage that you would have in a residential dwelling. In this case, the applicant's property is unique in that there is a rather large drainage slough that runs on both the east and north sides of their property. So there really is only one adjacent property, and it is the property to the south, which is a vacant, undeveloped lot. It's also worth noting that the applicant went around to all of the neighbors in the neighborhood, and those that were available and willing, they got signatures of support for the proposed home occupation, and that's also in your staff report. We also received a letter from the property owners of the adjacent property to the south voicing their support for the proposed home occupation that the applicant is proposing. So I think probably in addition to deciding whether or not the proposed operations taking place in a detached structure is appropriate, you will also need to question yourselves on how similar the proposed sign design and printing operation is to other permitted uses that you might have, such as artist studios, sculpture studios, or photography studios. One advantage that the applicant has pointed out is that because they are primarily a digital operation where most of their communication happens digitally, where somebody would contact them with a request, they would do the design work on the request, and they would send that digital design to the potential client. There aren't a lot of visits, so they don't have a lot of people coming to their place for business operations like you would have in a photography studio or a hair salon type of home occupation. So the biggest things that you find is how is this impacting the surrounding neighbors in terms of traffic, as well as noise and sound and things like that. And the applicant believes that in all of those categories, there would be very minimal impact on the surrounding properties. So we do have a few alternatives that we have for you, and they are on page 6 if you want to turn to page 6. So the first is that the board may direct that a home occupation certificate be issued for the applicant's business if it finds that the business operation will have no adverse effect on adjacent or neighboring properties. This includes prohibiting the applicant from having any outdoor storage of materials and or supplies, including vehicles or equipment used in the conduct of the business. Number 2, The board may vote to deny the certificate if it finds that adjacent neighboring properties would be adversely affected by the operation of a business of this type in a detached garage. On page 6 also, what you'll find is a list of restrictions and limitations that are prescribed in code already. And in addition to those, if you believe that this garage is an appropriate location and that for the proposed home occupation, we also have 3 other suggested conditions. And that would be number 1, there shall be no outdoor storage of materials or supplies, including vehicles or equipment used in the occupation. Number 2, all vinyl printing and production should take place within the detached garage and should not be conducted outside. And number 3, visits from customers must be arranged by appointment and scheduled so that traffic is no more than 1 vehicle at a time. So with that, staff would take any questions that you might have about the proposed home occupation in the detached garage that Ms. Gleason has.
Are there any questions for staff? Seeing none, would the applicant like to speak?
Good afternoon. My name's Gary Gleason. This is my wife, Mary. She will be taking pretty well this here operation hand to hand. And she wasn't ready to retire totally when we left the sign business. And we had a customer that really wanted us to stay with them, so that's one reason that we went into buying this machinery and starting this in our shop. This way she can do minimal work during the week that she wants to, and we don't have, like I say, the customers that we do have would always be on appointment because they would send their stuff across the internets to get to us and so forth. The customers that we do have now, we worked with them for 40 years, and so they're real particular with what they want, and that's what we're giving them. And so we don't have to have them come over for anything. They send us the projects that they have and what they want, and we know what to do. And we also deliver a lot of the materials to them. So very often do they have to come over to the shop to cause more traffic or anything. And I'd say we probably have, I would guess, maybe 1 vehicle a week that might stop.
Maybe.
And UPS probably stops more than anybody, but
For my house, for me personally.
yeah, really. And so we don't have a lot of traffic. We don't have hardly any noise. The machines are probably not as loud as your dishwasher in your house. They're very quiet machines, and Mary does almost all the work herself, except when she needs some of the heavier rolls put in the machine, and I have to help her on that. And so I think that this would be an opportunity for us to have this business be comfortable, and wouldn't be something we'd have to get up every morning and drive to, and being no larger than what we want to make it. And
We don't want to grow. We don't have any, we don't advertise. We don't, plan on having it get bigger, so.
And maybe, a little bit, but it's going to be minimal. And even at that, everything is done through the computers. And pretty much anytime somebody wants to come in, if they want designs that they want us to look at, then they'll come in. But it'll be
by appointment.
By
It's not, people don't drop in. They don't just pull up and drop in.
And I don't know, they have some pictures of the front of the building. I don't know if they would have them there, Dustin. And it would show you that the building looks, there's the building. So
Yeah.
you can't really tell that a business between it being the garage and into our home. It's all the same colors, same roof, same style. And the business is right there where you can see a little white sign
Yeah, I
that
just
has
have
the
that little
address
half.
on it. And so that's what we have, and that's what we're hoping that you'll pass today
Approve.
for us.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the applicant?
Any of the garage used to park vehicles?
For the business? No.
Well, for at all?
Oh, no, well,
Yes.
Gary uses the left half. He has a 55 Chevy he's working on.
Okay.
And mainly she has a half of that building there.
Yeah, I have.
Okay.
And so I get to work in this half and she works in the other half. But I just work on my own street cars and stuff.
Any additional questions? Is there anyone from the public that would like to speak?
We do not have anyone on Zoom at the moment.
All right, seeing no one in the audience, any comments from the board? Is there a motion from the board?
I move we approve application AP 23-1 with the 3 restrictions listed on page 7.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Yeah,
Good
just a second.
discussion.
Okay.
Carlo, did that include the restrictions and
Yes.
limitations on page 6 as
Yes.
well? Okay.
Yes.
Any additional discussion? All right, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carried.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you very much.
All right, is there any additional business to come before the board? Or is there anyone that would like to address the board? Seeing no additional information, is there a motion for adjournment?
Mr. Chair, I move we adjourn.
Is there a second?
I second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carried. Our meeting adjourned.